Welcome to ReReview, where we watch movies from our past with a perspective from today. Your hosts are Matt, Bobby, and Austin, and we love the films from our youth, so we're taking a look back to see if they still hold up. On this episode, we're discussing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Out of the Shadows. It was released in 2016, directed by Dave Green. It stars Megan Fox, Will Arnett, and Tyler Perry. This is the fifth film we've watched, second in the reboot, and it continues a journey of live action mixed with CGI turtles. Now, this is a fair warning. We're spoiling a 7-year-old movie, so if you haven't seen it, we will be revealing key plot points. I think the first thing I'll ask is, what do you want from a angsty teenage turtle film? I think we talked about this in the previous ones, kind of like, who is this geared towards? I was trying to put myself in the mindset, because this, I'll admit, was the first time I'm seeing it, of would I enjoy this if I was, maybe 13? And maybe I don't have problems with that. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, if I was in that demographic watching this movie in the theater, probably not. I think that it falls into the realm of hitting the beats that it probably needs to for that demographic. But then it's also like, but does it, I don't even know if that word existed back then, but was this cringe even back then for that demographic? Because it's kind of try hard at times, I think, to be hip and cool. But and again, it's like the first movie, the 2014 one is, I'm still not buying that these guys are teenagers. It still just doesn't feel like it.
They're like 27. They've been through a lot. Splinter even says, "Oh, you have to make a decision, and you are no longer boys." And it's like, wait a second.
Yo, that one
fighting and doing lots of crazy stuff already.
It's like, that one has a beard, like a full-on beard. That one's got like, no, these aren't boys anymore.
Yeah, and maybe the part of it when you talk about the beats, we, at least our commentary during it, definitely felt like there's a lot of moments things feel really extended. So maybe it's not only about making the turtles cool, but just how long or these scenes would be as they had their fights and the different things like that. Was there anything, Bobby, that really stood out to you from that perspective? Oh, I love that pause. Oh man, tell us how you really feel.
No. I mean, clearly they took a lot more from the TV show than in some of the previous ones. I think, we finally get Bebop and Rocksteady, which might be a nod to some of the previous movies with the Toka and Razor stuff, and we finally get Krang too. So there's that.
It's important that we got to see those characters. I mean, I don't know how, watching the cartoons for as long as we did, you wouldn't want to see everyone in the film. I think understanding we had Baxter the scientist in it, I was fully ready for his conversion into a fly. Definitely wanted that to happen. But I think we could come back to the start, because just like the other one, there's lots of scenic shots of the city, really trying to emphasize that you're in New York. Okay, we got it. We know where they're at. And they also have insane traversal skills. As Matt pointed out, they can move from one area to the other without even a Brett. So it does ask questions.
But no one sees them, and we don't see anybody else. There's like no one in the city.
There's no one in the city when they're moving around. I hate to admit that I kept thinking they keep moving in the sewer, so they're just full of poop. This is really gross. They make that water.
No, it's like
clean,
an abandoned subway, not like a sewer, I would hope.
Well, everything they're moving through is, anyways. They set it up, and I think it's kind of to keep our hairs, hence the name Out of the Shadows. And it's really trying to show us that they have an angst to be a part of the real world, and they go to a Knicks game from high in the rafters. Given that's the theme that they were aiming for, do you feel like they succeeded with taking the turtles out of the shadows?
Well, they kept saying it over and over again in the beginning. They're like. They're like, we've been in the shadows all this time.
Borderline waiting for them to look at the camera and be like, if only we could be out of the shadows.
That would have been amazing.
Dead eye in the camera.
So, I mean, it made me, it was kind of an interesting misdirect, because it really made me think that they were going to do the human serum. You know, especially in the beginning when they're like, oh, you know, like, we can't see, we want to be human, which I have to say, is a total tonal shift from the previous movies where they quote love being turtles. How did they go from they love being turtles to, oh, well, let's be human?
Yeah, I guess we didn't get a long lead up in terms of them showing a strong desire to be human. Like what caused that outside of like, oh, maybe they have some internal strife that we weren't made aware of?
And Bebop and Rocksteady had no problem mutating into animals at all. They're like, wow, this feels great. This is awesome. There's no like,
Oh, the fly moment or anything like that.
right. There's no like, oh, I'm sad. I'm not a human anymore. It's just like, hey, I'm an animal now. This is awesome. I could do things. I have a tail. Isn't this cool?
With that ancestral DNA.
Yeah. Do you know inside every human, there's a dormant gene that ties us to our animal ancestors?
Now we need to find out what our spirit animals are to see what we would turn into.
I was thinking that the entire time, going like, wait, shouldn't everyone just try to inject themselves and see what happens? Why is it an assumption that the turtles would turn into humans?
But then what if you turn into something you don't want to turn into? Then you're like, oops, need to try to figure out how to get back again.
You become a tick.
Which did they explain? There's not a way to get back, right? It's like an irreversible situation, right? Even though like if you put a little bit, it seems like he goes back, like he went to the 5 fingers and back to the 4 again.
Okay, maybe there's hope for Bebop and Rocksteady that it maybe in 6 months it wears off.
Maybe.
Something along those lines. I mean, we're taught that they use Will Arnett's character as kind of not the scapegoat, but really representing the person who saved the city. He's the hero that the city needed. And I think what caught us all off guard is they're at the Knicks game and we get like this, that they decide to interrupt the game to do a whole special of like what's happening, like how he saved the city. And I was like, what are we watching right now?
No, like this is like,
me.
To me, that was like the first time out. This isn't the halftime show, right? This is like
it really was. Like, let's just have a little break for that.
This is when like the cheerleaders are gonna dance or like the people are gonna shoot their t-shirts or whatever, but no, instead we'll just interview this one guy off to the side, not even at half court or whatever.
And then the side play during this is Megan Fox's April O'Neil talking to Tyler Perry Baxter, who is this scientist, and she's learning that they're gonna break Shredder out because
for some reason,
important thing to do.
Like, somehow he's connected to Shredder, Sensei Shredder or whatever.
And that's the thing. Like you mentioned that, Matt, and it's why, right?
Yeah.
Why does Baxter care?
It makes no sense. And then like the fact that he's leading it made even less sense. Like, and I feel like that was the thing throughout this movie that like threw me for a loop, which was the motivation of the villains throughout this was either not there, horribly translated, or whatever. Like I will give them credit. They at least kept the regardless of the fact that it wasn't set up properly, the turtles wanting to come out of the shadows, be recognized, maybe become humans, live a, maybe not a normal life, but a life where they're not considered abnormal or whatever. That was kept up fairly decently throughout the movie. All the villains, their thing made no sense. Tyler Perry's Baxter Stockton wanted to be well known in the annals of history. He already was to some extent. He's basically Neil deGrasse Tyson of this world or whatever, where everyone, like, people know his name. He's super well known for graduating from MIT or whatever at 15. Like, all these accolades that he has as a scientist already there. So it makes no sense why he's part of this whatsoever. How he hooked up with Shredder before he went to prison, by the way. He had to have met him before the first movie and was not involved in that movie at all whatsoever. So somehow that had to happen somewhere. And then you had like, Bebop and Rocksteady or whatever. Their motivation didn't really seem to exist at all. They just kind of rolled with everything. There wasn't really a rhyme or reason. And then Shredder made the least sense at all. The fact that, he just kind of rolled with Krang's plot.
Yeah, took a backseat to Krang.
Yeah.
And he's not supposed to be the backseat type of guy.
No, like I was wholly expecting the end of this movie. And a side note, you said you haven't seen it. I saw the first 20 minutes of it and stopped before. So I haven't seen it all the way through either. So getting to the end, I was wholeheartedly expecting Shredder to be like, ha, sucker, and like try to betray Krang or something like that in order to get a hold of the Technodrome so that he could take over the world, which I guess was his scope. From the first movie, it wasn't really all that clear either because, the first movie was they were going to release a virus and only they'd have the antidote. And somehow they're going to become rich, which made sense for Eric Sachs, but made no sense for Shredder whatsoever. And then again, here we are with another Shredder who has no motivation, as far as I can tell, a quote unquote vague take over the world thing. And then Krang was the only one that didn't necessarily make sense, but they just kind of went with the fact that he was a world taking over. He's like Frieza from Dragon Ball. Like, he's just an ass. He just takes over planets because he can. Right.
But I was kind of surprised that Shredder didn't at least like expect him to double cross him.
No, we're bros. We're partners. We met for 3 minutes and we're totally in this together.
Right. Yep. No, I totally expected Shredder to be like, I knew you were going to do this and do something about it. Instead, he was just like, wait, what? Surprised when nobody else was surprised at all.
So part of this is this interaction we're talking about between Shredder and Krang is there's the breakout scene and there's teleportation involved. And the first thing I noticed, and he came back in pain, is that it was like a full matter, like decompiler, recompiler process. It wasn't, it seemed painful. How did they know this is going to work?
Well, that was the thing, right? Baxter was like, we weren't going to do this, but we have no choice, which is a really weird decision to make at the moment because it's not like Shredder was like in like a crap situation when they used the teleporter. He was literally he would have got caught by the net, but they literally have like 500 ninjas that probably could have solved that problem pretty easily. Why they felt the teleporter was 100 like necessary? Like it reminded me of Galaxy Quest with their little splicer that splices them into cubes to transport them. Like that's literally what it reminded me of at the time. Like I was expecting Shredder to pop into the thing and it's like his arm was sticking out of his head or something.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah, I kind of thought the same thing maybe.
How do we feel about that as an overall action scene, Bobby? I mean, it's a freeway chase. The quintessential action movie thing to do. Freeway chase.
Right. No, I mean, there's a lot of like that kind of thing in this movie. A lot of like chasing and moving around and going after and up buildings and down buildings and under, and there's just a lot going on and lens flares,
giant nunchucks and
quips, and yes, the giant nunchucks. There's just a lot of like over the topness, and I don't know if that's like, ooh, like this will be a really good toy. Let's make this thing here now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of want a dump truck with gigantic nunchuck arms that I could control somehow.
Doesn't that sound good?
It's so useless. But we do get introduced to I think a fan favorite for what is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Whether it's a fan favorite in this film is what I'm going to ask you. Now, how do you feel about Casey Jones? Stephen Amell is Casey Jones. You know what I said right away. I'm like, it's the Arrow.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but it's the place that I went straight for too. And like the hardest part about it was, I think that out of everything in this franchise, that was going to be the hardest one for me, for them to reboot Casey Jones. I think Elias did such a great job with him. And then what we got with Stephen Amell was so cookie cutter vanilla. Like he didn't have any of the real personality. Like I don't believe that his
motivation was very clear.
I wanted to be a detective.
Hey
all my life I've wanted to be a detective.
Y'all are killing me.
I'll tell anybody at any time.
But he plays hockey too, so it all meshes right into a character. If I ignored the previous incarnation of it and looked at it just as it is, I don't necessarily think that they gave him what he needed to become Casey Jones, because Casey Jones was always supposed to be like a vigilante. And so like they very easily could, because I mean, if you think of like Dark Knight Rises with Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Robin or whatever in that movie, a very like he was a cop, became very disillusioned. And he's like, I can't do what's right if I'm in this position because the authority gets in the way. There's too much compromise whenever it comes to what's, to do what's right. And so he tosses his badge into the ocean or whatever, which is littering, by the way. And he, essentially is, intended to become the next Batman, another vigilante. They didn't really do that for Steven's character here. I feel like if they were going to make him a cop who became a vigilante, it wasn't quite there. Like what was her name? Laura Lindley's character, Chief Vincent. Like her character comes in and basically is like, sit on the bench, right? And that's what leads to him basically becoming the vigilante in this one. And it just didn't quite work for me as much as what we got previously. And even within the context of this movie, it just wasn't. It didn't feel right. It just, again, how many characters? Like, I almost felt like they knew this was gonna be it, and they're like, "Well, how many characters from the franchise can we put in here?"
Then I'd say not enough, right?
Right. Well, really, was it going to be it? Because Baxter didn't become a Fly. That was like the one thing they didn't have time for, and I wonder if it was in the script, and they're just like, "There's too much going on."
Maybe they did it. They saw the CG, and they were just like, "No, we can't. No."
Well, that's a great time to talk through a little bit of the tech stuff. Bobby, give us your rating on the CG. How are we feeling about it?
Yeah, fine.
Good. Fine is good.
No, I mean, like, it was fine. I mean, Okay,
what about the turtles themselves? Because there were little changes they made, right?
Yeah, I mean, last time I talked about how, like, I didn't like their design, but this time I've kind of, like, lived with it. I know that this is what we're getting, but, I thought their facial movements seemed to work. I didn't have any issues with that, and I thought that they look pretty good. And you mentioned, like, they did a lot of hard stuff with them. There's like cloth simulations, and they went into water and all sorts of different lighting scenarios for them. So this seemed like a pretty technically challenging movie. And then, like, there was this like pretty innocuous scene where like Bebop is going through like a parking lot and just destroying one car after the other. And like, I was thinking, like, this is Mayhem again, it's like 12 cars getting destroyed in this one shot here. And there's just,
it's funny you mentioned that scene because he's running after Casey Jones. And I was going, I kind of want to see the behind the scenes on this one, because there's a moment when they're fighting each other where, and this is also at the end when the police chief is talking to the turtles, they did a good job with their eye lines and kind of making it feel like they were actually in the presence of these CGI creatures. So I was like, I'd like to see the behind the scenes of how they did this, because obviously Bebop and Rocksteady were massive, right? So
sure,
the way he moved around them, I was like, this looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it that looked good. I mean, and this movie must just be like a massive technical undertaking with all the physical effects and the CG and just integrating the two of them together. So,
but I think where, Matt, we talked about the where it seemed to really stand out or make a difference, where it maybe wasn't as good, is when they would switch to what were really full CG scenes, where everything behind them was CG, and it felt like, for me, frames were dropping is the best way I could describe it, but it didn't feel as smooth as maybe when they were interacting with the live action.
It felt weirdly like at one point when they were going through the Technodrome scene where like they were kind of up in the air, it felt weirdly like I was looking at these CG characters behind a blue screen for some reason. Like the compositing wasn't quite right with it, which is weird because it was all CG. So there should have been no reason for it. It's weird because I think right before that I had complimented because they had the scenes where, the turtles kind of come out of the shadows. They get introduced to the police or whatever as, hey, we're the good guys. We're part of the team. And I was like, wow, they actually look pretty, like, you're talking about like the river scene looks really good. The daytime scene with them looks good, which is infamously where like, CG falls apart like that. That's the reason why I usually have them in the dark, moving really fast and stuff like that. A lot of shadows. they were in broad daylight and they actually looked pretty good. I was like, oh, that looks pretty good. And then it cuts to the last battle sequence. And I was like, wow, this is falling apart so quick for some reason. Like clearly they were running out of budget or time. And like they forgot to turn it from, like the extreme settings, and they were just at like medium setting for their render cards.
That totally is what it was, wasn't it?
But I bet
or someone asked for one extra level of ray tracing, and then it just shot down the machine. Go ahead, Bobby.
I bet there's a bunch of stuff that's fully CG. Like I bet the whole like beginning sequence with the whole like Chrysler building or whatever is entirely.
But I feel like they got away with that because it was probably at night. It was probably a little bit less noticeable. I like the sequence itself was completely ludicrous. It made no sense whatsoever, but I feel like the quality of it held up a bit better at that point than it did at the end. It's funny because like it just felt like something was off. Even like Krang was like, it felt like the quality for him kind of fell off a little bit. And even like the Technodrome, some of the shots just weren't quite holding up quite as well. It's just weird because like, and maybe it's because some of the shots that I'm thinking of that kind of held up better than I thought were totally trailer shots. Like the tank popping out of the river and shooting the missile or the shell at the turtles or whatever, like held up pretty well. Like Bebop and Rocksteady, not so much, but the sequence itself wasn't bad. But like I said, maybe they were just running out of time. Or maybe it was a reshoot. Maybe it was different and they had to go back and redo it. They just didn't have the budget or the time to, give it 100%.
So we see their CG transitions. You mentioned that you're not so into that, how they appeared. But how do we feel about the, we're back at still an ooze chase, right? The whole premise is there's some ooze. We all got to get a hold of it. Somehow they're in Brazil because they need to get, two parts. We need to get the ooze, but also there's all the Krang stuff going on because he wants to come in and there's a Technodrome?
Technodrome, yeah.
That somehow everyone is aware of, even though they've never heard of this technology before. From just the ooze standpoint, and then leading into what is another very lengthy plane action scene with turtles falling through the sky, which does lead to that lovely looking water. As we kind of walk through all that, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of got bored.
Yeah, that it felt like this movie was too long for what it was, and even though there was set pieces that I felt like should have kept it going decently, too many plot threads, too many, action sequences that really felt blank, made it just, you guys heard me. I was like, we're not even halfway. But I felt like it was, though.
The whole like end set piece with the like portal coming over New York City sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it?
Just short of aliens coming out and the team standing in a group and the camera circles around as one of them roars at the camera.
I was waiting for the Avengers to pop out and try to push them back into the thing, and I was like, wait a minute, did they like?
This was in 2016. How epic would it have been if the Avengers had showed up? Crossover, Iron Man,
the ultimate crossover. I have to ask, just because it is an important character from youth, how did we feel about Krang?
It's the design of it wasn't terrible. Like you had said, I don't really understand why he keeps shooting out of the stomach piece. Yeah, his armor, his protective thing. That didn't make much sense to me. I think that no matter what, it was going to be an uphill battle to do it. I think that for the most part, it was okay. I think that the thing that hurt it the most is the fact that Krang showed up kind of out of nowhere when Shredder teleported, and then he reappears at the end. Like you said, they were chasing the ooze for a good chunk of the movie, and then now the Technodrome was coming out of the portal that they somehow knew about, and it felt like there was two movies that had been spliced together inorganically, and as a result, we didn't really get anything about Krang until he shows up again, and it was just kind of there. I think that the thing that threw me off the most was like the entire time I was just hearing Brad Garrett's voice from Everyone Loves Raymond the entire time. And I even made the comment like the CG for him was like not there, especially considering like, you know, this was past the era of like Davy Jones from the Pirates of the Caribbean, which looked amazing. And he was like the most CG looking thing in the entire movie.
I feel like they made it harder on themselves than it needed to be, like with him coming out and going back in. Like he could have just been inside the robot.
Yep.
And then, but instead, like he'd pop out and then they'd have to push him back in. But instead of him just going in, like he'd be like some blob of jelly. And like, so it's like they added all this extra layer of, like, it almost would have worked better. Like if like, he slipped out of it or something and, you know, like, and then he had to try to push himself back in or something. But it was
Which
just,
I feel the cartoon may have done that at times.
You know what I was just thinking about? This movie didn't really need Shredder in it.
No.
I think this movie could have been about Baxter and Krang trying to do all this. I think that would have been actually perfect. Like Shredder didn't add anything other than having the foot there. So like if you removed him and just had Baxter as like the main thing and then having Krang being the leading force to it, it would have been fine.
what about Bebop and Rocksteady? They kind of had that Shredder connection a bit.
It didn't have to be though. They could have just been two goons.
It could have been a Baxter connection, right?
Totally could have been. They could have totally just like, yeah, that's how they found them. They were in the same, you know, truck together or whatever, but they could have been anybody. They could have literally just found like they could have been two, you know, goons that, you know, Baxter or whoever, you know, anyone Eric Sachs came back or something like that. But Shredder himself wasn't really necessary, and it just kind of underserved Shredder himself in the story. And it made Krang just kind of a side character in this, even though he was the final thing. So
yeah, it's
a shame.
Well, they did definitely try to set it up at the end for another one, since Krang said like, I'll be back, basically. And, you know, ultimately we were watching these in the lead up for the new one that's coming out for Mutant Mayhem, whose art style I'd say is more akin to like Spider, the animated Spider-Mans that came out recently. So I think it's a good way, now that we've gone through 5 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle related films, why don't we rank them from 1990 to today? Yeah, do you say yikes, Bobby?
Yeah.
Bobby, if you had to stack all 5 of them that we've watched so far, tell me, what's your order?
Oh man. All right, well, I'm partial to the very first 1990 whatever one it is. The very first one. So that's first on my list.
It just falls off from there.
Yeah, there it goes.
And then that's where it gets hard, because it drops off a cliff after that. I don't know. I guess the second one, because I still like the original second one, the Secret of the Ooze, I guess. Yeah. Even though that has a bunch of trouble, because I still like the Jim Henson stuff. And then, yeah, I mean, the problem is, like, where do you put the others? I guess I would do, like, the first reboot, and then the third one, Turtles in Time, and then this one last, I guess, just to kind of, like, mix up the end there a bit.
1, 2, 4, 3, 5. Got it.
Yeah.
Matt?
If I go from the opposite direction, if I go from worst to best, I'd probably put the third movie at the bottom position. Then I'd probably put. It's weird because I guess in my mind I'm looking at potential of what it could have been and what they tried to do versus what it necessarily delivered as. I'd probably say it's the third one is at the very bottom, and then the 2014 Ninja Turtles, then this one, and then 2, and then 1.
1 being the
best,
the top. Yeah. Okay. I feel like it's that the 4 and the 5 here that can just be swapped out. I agree with you. Number 3 is at the bottom, 1 and 2 to start, and then I don't know, maybe if I have a a beer or something, 4 can be above 5 or 5 can be above 4. Those two can kind of interrotate with each other. 3 just gets to sit way at the bottom there. Oh my gosh, what happened with that one? So I'm hoping, Mutant Mayhem has something positive for us. Are y'all looking forward to that?
I think that it has a lot of potential. I mean, I think that being animation gives them more breathing room than I think the live action stuff is. It definitely gives them more room to introduce characters that are kind of out there. If the animation style is anything like the Into the Spider-Verse stuff, I think that could be pretty cool. I don't know. I'm kind of looking forward to it. I think that they'll probably deliver. Hopefully it's a coherent storyline where like they definitely at least got the kid thing. Like it feels like from the trailers that they're actually teenagers. So I appreciate that.
And not burgeoning on their early 30s. Bobby, you looking forward to Mutant Mayhem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, Matt, you kind of hit it on the head with the animation thing. I think that really says a lot for it. And I think that I'm looking forward to the style and all the things. And, one thing that's fun with animation that kind of works in animation that doesn't work in live action is, a lot of the things that kind of happened in this movie, I think will be better in some of the other ones if they kind of try to do the same type of thing.
So I think this will be my final question, Bobby. If you, and yes, I'm looking forward to the animated one. If you look at live action films of these, when they take these cartoons that are beloved and make them live action, do you think there's room to do that again in the future? Can you take something like the Turtles and bring it back, get the costumes going again?
I mean, I think there's room to do it. I just think it depends on how you do it. I mean, this one, clearly they just wanted to jam a bunch of stuff in it, and this one they didn't really worry too much about the script, it seems. Although, there's a lot that goes into movies, so it's hard to blame only the script. But they seemed to just kind of explain to us what was happening a lot. Like, there was a lot of
they did.
There was a lot of exposition in this one. But I think part of the problem is it required that too, because there was a lot going on. One director said, have your characters be complex, but your plot line's simple. And I think that's a good, I don't know what you call those kinds of things, idioms to live by. So I'd like to see that done in the next iteration of whatever cartoon they decide to reboot or turtle movie or whatever.
Live action tick. Matt, do you think there's room for live action again?
It's part of me wants to say yes, but the other part of me has the problem with converting something that's an animated form by nature into live action. I kind of don't want to see it just because I feel like some of it just doesn't translate very well. It's like, I really don't want to see any live action Avatar series that's coming out or whatever, because there's just stuff that you can get away with in animation or comics or whatever that I don't think live action really does, especially whenever it comes to comedy. I think that sometimes the comedy gets lost. Things that are kind of childish in animation that you can do that you just can't do in live action. I do think that if they do try to do a live action, I kind of would much rather them do a more practical approach to it with a mix of CG to kind of get rid of things like the seam lines and help with facial expressions and stuff like that. I don't know if I need 6 foot tall, monster turtles with freakish
like a
faces.
little bit, oh my gosh. There goes my brain going blank. I was going to say Daredevil, but that's not who I mean. Ryan Reynolds.
Oh, Deadpool.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. There goes any geek cred I have. A little bit of that with the CG kind of helping along, right?
Yeah, for like the expressions and stuff with the eyes and everything. Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that at least it would be enough of a nostalgia trip that I think that you'd at least bring in the fans like us who grew up on the original Ninja Turtles. Yeah, you can't do as much, but that's where like hopefully the CG would kind of, supplement the things that you can't do in a suit, right?
Yeah, I asked because I'd like it. There's just something still when things aren't, heavily dominated by CG. It's really nice to see. So maybe they'll do that one day. Maybe they will. Well, I'm glad we went on this journey. Maybe never do 5 films of the same series again, especially with how this tiered downwards. We didn't have, anything to look forward to. We'll see. Maybe there's another thing that'll bring us some joy that we can commit 5
Trek
movies
or Bond, and it's like 40 movies.
Just do a full-on Bond year. Never-ending Bond. As always, thank you for listening. And Bobby, you took my quote. I'm just gonna let you know.
Oh, did I? What did I say?
So I'm just gonna finish with this one. Ask yourself, what would Vin Diesel do?